I know what this bike means to you, Jackson said, his voice dropping so low it was almost swallowed by the desert wind. And I'm not going to buy it. Emily stared at him, the handwritten sign trembling in her grip. Her lips pressed together so hard they went white. She had not slept in 2 days. She had told herself she would not cry. Not out here. Not in front of strangers. Then why are you still standing here? She whispered. Jackson crossed his arms and looked at her, the way a man looks at someone he recognizes not by face, but by the particular kind of tired they carry. Because, he said quietly, I think you're in trouble that's bigger than a motorcycle sale. If you've never had to sell the last thing your father ever touched, the last thing that still smells like him, that still carries the memory of his hands and his laugh, then you don't know the kind of silence that falls over a person when they realize they're about to do exactly that. Before we go any further, if this story already has your attention, if something in those first words made your chest tight, just a little, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. Emily Carter did not plan on becoming someone worth saving. She was 21 years old and she had made a sign. That was the full extent of her strategy. She had folded a piece of cardboard in half, written 4 words across the front in black marker, "Please buy my Harley," and driven 37 miles outside of Tucson to a gas station on Route 84, where truckers and riders stopped because there was nothing else for miles in either direction. She parked the bike at the edge of the lot where it would be visible from the highway. She stood beside it, and she waited. It was 9:40 in the morning and already 103 degrees. She had been awake since 4. She had sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, going over the numbers. One more time, the same numbers she had been going over for 3 weeks, and the numbers had not changed. Ryan needed $42,000 for the inpatient treatment program that the specialist in Phoenix said was not optional. It was the only facility within range that handled his condition with the kind of intensive care that could actually work. The intake deadline was in 6 days. Emily had $11,000 saved. She had sold her car. She had borrowed from her friend Dana until Dana had nothing left to give. She had called every relative she could think of, including an aunt in Nevada she hadn't spoken to in 4 years, and gotten answering machines and polite regrets and one absolute silence that was worse than either. The Harley was worth somewhere between $28,000 and $32,000, depending on who you asked. Her father had bought it used 15 years ago and spent the next decade making it something extraordinary. Not flashy, not chrome-heavy or showbike perfect, just right. Every component chosen with the same deliberate care that James Carter brought to everything he did. He had been a mechanic for 30 years, and his hands had known that bike the way they knew nothing else. He had died 16 months ago. Heart attack. Fast, the doctor said, as if that were a comfort. Emily had inherited the Harley, the tools in his garage, and a moral code that had cost her almost everything she had left. She stood beside the bike with her sign and squinted at the heat coming off the asphalt and told herself she was not going to think about her father right now. She was going to make the sale and drive back to Tucson and call the treatment facility and give Ryan something to hold on to. She was going to be practical. She had been standing there for an hour and 40 minutes when the 4 Harleys pulled off the highway. She heard them before she saw them, the specific, layered rumble of multiple V-twin engines throttling down in sequence, the kind of sound that vibrates in your sternum rather than your eardrums. 4 riders. They pulled into the gas station single file, and she tracked them automatically, the way she had been tracking every vehicle that slowed near the pump. They were older. The youngest of the 4 looked like he was somewhere in his mid-40s. And the man who pulled up first, big through the shoulders, iron gray beard, a road captain's patch on his cut, she put him at mid-50s. He rode like a man who had been doing it since before she was born. No performance in it, just complete and settled ownership of the machine under him. She watched them park. She adjusted her grip on the sign. She reminded herself she was not embarrassed. She had nothing to be embarrassed about. The gray-bearded man got off his bike and stretched, hands pressing into the small of his back for a moment. And then he looked across the lot and saw her. He did not look away. She held the sign a little higher. He said something to the man beside him, younger, shorter, with a red bandana tied at his throat, and then he walked toward her. Not quickly, not like a man trying to decide whether to stop, like a man who had already decided. "You selling that bike?" he said when he was close enough that she didn't have to shout over the wind. "Yes, sir," Emily said. "It's a 1998 Harley Davidson Road King. My father built it up over about 10 years. New cam, new heads, fuel injection conversion, custom suspension. I have the full documentation. It runs perfect." She had rehearsed that. The professional version. The version that kept her voice flat and her face neutral. The man looked at the bike for a long moment. He walked around it slowly, not touching, just looking. Then he looked back at her. "What are you asking?" 28,000 firm, she said. "It's worth more. I just need the sale to happen today." He nodded once, still looking at her. "Today," he repeated. "Yes, sir." "Why today?" And that was the question she had not rehearsed an answer for. Because she had told herself she wasn't going to explain. She was going to make a clean transaction. She was going to keep the personal part out of it. But something about the way he asked it, not prying, not curious in a casual way, just careful, like someone who already suspected the answer might matter, made the rehearsed distance collapse before she could stop it. "My brother needs money for medical treatment," she said. "The deadline is in 6 days." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How old's your brother?" 17. "And this bike was your dad's." It wasn't a question. He had read it somehow, from the way she was standing beside it, from the angle of her body relative to the frame, from some combination of details that told him the bike meant more than inventory. Emily said yes. The man nodded again, and this time she could see something shift behind his eyes. Not pity. She would have hated pity. Something else. Something more like recognition. "I'm Jackson Reed," he said, and he extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief and completely without drama. "Emily Carter." "Emily," he said. "You mind if my guys take a look at the bike before we talk numbers?" "Go ahead," she said. She had not expected 4 of them to actually look at it. She had assumed one of them might glance at the engine, maybe check the tires, the kind of cursory inspection a buyer does when they're mostly already decided. Instead, all 4 of them gathered around the road, king with the focused, unhurried attention of men who knew exactly what they were looking at. The one with the red bandana, his name turned out to be Pete, crouched beside the rear wheel and examined the brake assembly without touching it. "Your dad do this work himself?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," Emily said. "He was a mechanic for 30 years. "This caliper is mint," Pete said. The third man, older, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead that he never actually used, introduced himself as Sal. He was running his hand along the fuel tank with the careful attention of someone reading Braille. "Original paint?" he asked. He had it done about 5 years ago. Same shop did the custom seat stitching. He kept receipts for everything, if you want to see them. Sal looked at her over the top of his glasses that weren't really on his face. "You have the receipts." "I have everything." The fourth man, tall, quiet, early 40s, who had not introduced himself, was looking at the engine. He was not touching it either, just looking. And then he said, not to Emily but to Jackson, "I've owned 11 Harleys. I've never seen one this well maintained by a private owner. This is a professional job." Jackson was watching her. "Your father," he said. "He a mechanic by trade or by love?" "Both," Emily said. "He worked at Creosote Motors for 22 years. Did his own bikes nights and weekends. Taught me to do the same." "You're a mechanic too?" "Was," Emily said, and then stopped. She had not meant to say that. The word came out with an edge on it that she hadn't intended, and she saw Jackson register it immediately. "Was," he repeated. "I'm between things right now." There was a silence that lasted about 3 seconds. 3 seconds was long enough, Emily Jackson said. "Why don't we sit down?" There was a concrete barrier at the edge of the lot, low enough to sit on, shaded by the corner of the gas station's awning for about 4 feet on either end. Jackson sat on one end. He gestured to the space beside him. Emily hesitated. She was still holding the sign, and then she folded it under her arm and sat down. The other three drifted away. Not obviously. They moved back toward the bikes, gave them space, and Emily appreciated it more than she expected to. "How long have you been out here?" Jackson asked. "About 2 hours. Before that, how long have you been carrying whatever made you need to do this?" She looked at him. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely. "Whatever this is." The concerned approach. I'm not fragile. I just need to sell the bike." "I know you're not fragile," Jackson said, without any particular emphasis. "Fragile people don't stand alone on Route 84 in 100-degree heat for 2 hours with a handmade sign. I'm not worried about whether you can handle things. I'm trying to figure out what things you're handling." Emily looked at the asphalt. "I told you about my brother. You told me the surface of it. There's something else." She didn't answer. "The word was," Jackson said. "You said you were a mechanic. Something happened." The sign was getting damp from her hands. She became aware of that the moisture from her palms soaking into the cardboard, and she set it down on the concrete beside her. "I worked at Harrison Custom Garage," she said, "for 2 years. Victor Harrison, he's been operating in Tucson for about 15 years. Big reputation. Corporate accounts, custom builds, the whole thing. My dad's name got me the interview. His reputation carried enough weight that Victor brought me on, which was at the time I thought I was incredibly lucky. What changed? About 8 months in, I started noticing things, small things first. A customer would come in, I'd write up the estimate. And by the time the invoice went out, it was 20% higher than what I quoted. I figured maybe I'd miscalculated. Victor told me I was still learning the billing system. Okay, that happened twice more and I started keeping copies. Jackson said nothing. He was listening with the full weight of his attention, and Emily found that both easier and harder than she expected. Easier because he wasn't interrupting. Harder because it was exactly the kind of listening that made you keep going. Then the wage stuff started, she said, or I started noticing it. Workers being clocked out 30-40 minutes before their actual shift ended. Overtime hours just gone from the records. I asked about it. I was told it was a software error. It kept happening. It happened specifically to the guys who didn't have the time or the language skills to argue about it. And you documented that too. I did, Emily said. For 3 months, I documented everything I could see. And then I found something I wasn't supposed to find. She stopped. Jackson waited. Victor has a storage room in the back of the shop, Emily said. I was in there getting parts, and I found a second set of billing records. Physical files. Paper. It's almost old-fashioned now that I think about it, keeping paper records you don't want found. But he thought nobody would ever look there because he controlled who had access to the back storage. What was in the files? Customer records going back at least 5 years. Charges for parts that were never installed. Labor hours that were tripled, sometimes more, on insurance claims. He was running a systematic fraud on anyone who came through with an insurance-related repair. And the employees who were getting their hours shaved the money had to be coming from somewhere, and the insurance fraud was where it came from. It was a whole system. Jackson exhaled slowly through his nose. It was not a surprise sound. You reported him, he said. I reported him, Emily confirmed. I went to the labor board first. Then I filed a complaint with the Arizona RRC Registrar of Contractors. I documented everything I had, and I submitted it, and I told myself that was what you do when you find something wrong. That was what my father would have done. And Victor found out. Within a week, she said. I don't know who told him. Maybe nobody. Maybe he figured it out himself. He called me into his office on a Wednesday, and he sat across from me, and he smiled, and he said, Emily, I think we both know this isn't working out. He fired you. He fired me, and then he started calling people. My dad had a reputation in the mechanic community in Tucson. 30 years of it. Victor started making calls to every shop he had relationships with, which was most of them, and telling people I had a history of fabricating complaints against employers, that I had stolen from him, that I was unstable. She said the last word flatly. The way you say a word when you've heard it used against you so many times it's lost its ability to hurt and turned into something colder. He used my father's reputation against me, she said, because my dad couldn't defend himself anymore. And the people who knew my dad but didn't know me very well, they were confused enough that they didn't hire me. And the ones who didn't know my dad just heard what Victor was saying and believed it. How long ago was this? 4 months ago. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Emily realized she had just said more to this stranger in 10 minutes than she had said to anyone in 4 months. The complaints you filed, he said, are they still active? Technically. But these things take time, months, sometimes years. And Ryan's deadline is in 6 days. And the documentation you kept, you still have it? Emily looked at him. Why? He met her gaze. He did not look away and he did not rush the answer. Because what you're describing, he said, is not a closed story. It's a story that's still happening. And if the documentation exists, that matters. The documentation exists, she said. But it doesn't pay for my brother's treatment in 6 days. No, Jackson agreed. It doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected and would think about for a long time afterward. Tell me about your father. She almost said, why does that matter? The words were right there, but she didn't say them. He was a mechanic, she said. He worked on bikes. He loved the work. He used to say that machines are honest, that they tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen, and they never lie to you about it. Sounds like he passed that on. He tried, Emily said. He also used to say that the worst thing you can do with the truth is keep it to yourself when someone needs to hear it. And that's why you reported Victor. That's why I reported Victor. And that's why I've spent 4 months dealing with what came after. Jackson looked at the Road King. He looked at it for a long moment. That bike, he said, your father built it the way he built everything else. With honesty and care. You've kept it the same way. Emily didn't answer. You're about to sell it to fix something that shouldn't have broken, he said. The situation your brother's in, that's real, and it needs to be handled. But the reason you're in this position, standing out here with that sign, that's because someone did something wrong and you paid for it instead of him. That's how it went. Yes, that doesn't sit right with me, Jackson said. Emily looked at him. It doesn't have to sit right with you. It's my problem. It was your problem, he said. Now it's also mine. You don't know me. No, Jackson said. I know the situation. That's enough. He stood up from the concrete barrier and stretched, the same easy movement she'd seen when he first got off his bike. Then he looked back at her. I'm not buying the Harley, he said. Her stomach dropped. Excuse me? I'm not buying it, he said again. And I'm going to tell you why, and you're going to be angry with me for about 30 seconds. And then I think you're going to understand. Emily stood up. She was a full foot shorter than him, and she did not care. That bike, she said, is the only thing I have left to sell. My brother needs that money. What exactly do you think gives you the right to, Emily? His voice did not rise. It did not become defensive or hard. It just stayed level. You said your father taught you that machines tell the truth and people should do the same. She stopped. What I'm telling you is the truth, Jackson said. If I buy that bike today, you solve one problem, and Victor Harrison keeps operating. He keeps stealing from customers. He keeps shorting workers who can't fight back. And 6 months from now, there's somebody else standing on the side of a road, selling the last thing their family had because of something Victor did. And your father's machine is in my garage instead of with you. She did not answer immediately. The wind moved across the lot. A truck pulled in toward the pump, and nobody noticed. What are you proposing? Emily said finally. I'm proposing we have a different conversation, Jackson said. One that might take longer than today, but ends somewhere better than today. I'm proposing that you show me exactly what you have documented on Victor Harrison, and we figure out what it's actually worth. Emily looked at him for a long moment. I have a 6-day deadline. I know you do, and we're going to handle it. I need you to trust me for about 24 hours. She was quiet. She looked at the bike. She looked at the sign lying face up on the concrete. 4 words in black marker. Who are you? She said. Not your name. I mean, who are you? Why does any of this matter to you? Jackson was quiet for a moment. My father was a mechanic, he said. Small shop, great reputation. When I was 11 years old, a business competitor spread a rumor that he was cutting parts on brake jobs. It wasn't true, but it spread. He lost 30% of his customers in 2 months, and he never got them back, and he died. A quiet man who spent the last 15 years of his life wondering what he could have done differently. He didn't do anything differently. He just got in the way of someone who was willing to lie. Emily was very still. Victor Harrison, Jackson said, is the kind of man my father spent his whole life trying not to become. And you're the kind of person my father would have wanted someone to stand up for. He held out his hand again. Not a sale handshake. Something else. Give me 24 hours, he said. Emily looked at his hand. She looked at the Harley. She looked at the sign on the ground. And then, for the first time since her father died, for the first time since she had sat in Victor Harrison's office and heard the word unstable said about her with a smile, Emily Carter felt something shift in her chest that was not grief and not panic, and not the particular loneliness of being the only person who knows the truth. She reached out and shook Jackson Reed's hand. 24 hours, she said, and nothing about the next 6 days would go the way either of them expected. Jackson walked back to the other three and said 4 words. We've got a situation. Pete straightened up from the bike he'd been leaning against. Sal took off his non-existent glasses and turned to look. The fourth man, his name was Marcus. Emily would learn, and he had been a paralegal for 6 years before he became a full-time writer, which was not a combination she would have predicted, crossed his arms and waited. What kind of situation? Pete said. Jackson told them. Briefly, cleanly, without editorializing. The brother, the treatment deadline, the job at Harrison Custom Garage, the documents, the firing, the reputation campaign. He told them the name. Sal said Victor Harrison, out of Tucson? You know him? Emily asked. Sal looked at her for a moment before answering. I know of him. My brother-in-law brought his car in there 3 years ago for an insurance job after a fender bender. The claim came out almost double what the shop he took it to before had quoted for the same damage. Did he report it? He assumed he'd misunderstood something. You know how it is. You're dealing with insurance. You're dealing with a shop you've never been to. Everything sounds plausible. He paid what the insurance covered and moved on. He's one of dozens, Emily said. Maybe hundreds. I only saw a piece of what Victor has been running. The documentation I have goes back 5 years, and it's not complete. Marcus had taken out his phone. He was not texting. He was making notes. You filed with the ROTS, he said. Yes. And the labor board, yes. Do you have a case number? Emily gave it to him from memory. She had memorized it the way you memorize the things that are supposed to protect you. Marcus nodded and kept writing. The challenge with regulatory complaints, he said, without looking up, is that they move on their own schedule, which is rarely the schedule you need them on. What you need in the next 6 days is not a regulatory resolution. What you need is a parallel track. A parallel track, Emily repeated. Legal counsel who specializes in employment and labor, specifically wage theft and retaliatory termination, combined with whatever civil exposure the customer fraud creates. The 2 cases are connected. The fraud funded the wage theft, and a good attorney can argue them as a unified pattern of conduct. That changes the landscape considerably. Emily looked at him. You know a lot about this for a motorcycle rider, she said. I was a paralegal for 6 years, Marcus said, still writing. And I've seen 3 situations in my life that looked like yours. 2 of them ended badly because the person involved didn't have anyone in their corner who knew how to navigate the first 48 hours. The third one ended differently. How did the third one end? He looked up from his phone and met her eyes. The person who'd been wronged got everything they were owed, he said. And the person who wronged them lost their business license. The lot was quiet for a moment, except for the low whistle of desert wind. Emily looked at Jackson. You said 24 hours, she said. I said 24 hours, he confirmed Marcus. You still have Rachel Morgan's number? Marcus was already scrolling. Calling her now, he said. Emily stood between four men she had met 45 minutes ago on the side of a highway in the Arizona desert, and she felt the particular vertigo of a moment when everything is about to change direction, when the narrative you have been living inside, the one where you are alone and the clock is running out, and the only asset left is your father's motorcycle, suddenly shows a seam, a crack where something else might come through. She looked at the Road King. She thought about her father's hands on the handlebars. She thought about 16 months of mornings waking up to the fact that he was gone. She thought about Ryan, 17 years old, and struggling with something that deserved to be fought with everything she had. She thought about the moment in Victor Harrison's office when he said unstable and smiled. She picked up her cardboard sign from the concrete. She folded it in half, and then she folded it again and again until it was a small square in her hands, and she dropped it in the trash can beside the gas station door. She was done asking strangers to buy her father's Harley. She had something better now. She just didn't know yet how much better or how much harder the next 6 days were going to get before they got there. Marcus was still on the phone. His voice had gone into a different register, professional, specific, the clipped cadence of someone who knows exactly what they're saying and to whom. Emily could hear fragments: retaliatory termination, systematic wage theft, documentation spanning 5 years, 6-day deadline on a separate medical emergency. She heard him say the name Victor Harrison. She heard the pause on the other end of the line. And then she heard Marcus say, "Yes, that's what I said. Harrison Custom Garage." Another pause. "I'll have her call you in 2 hours, Marcus said, and ended the call. He looked at Emily. "Rachel Morgan," he said. "She's an employment attorney in Phoenix. She has heard of Victor Harrison. Apparently he's come up before in the context of a wage theft class action that stalled out about 2 years ago because the primary witness recanted. She thought that case was dead." Emily felt something cold move through her. "What witness?" she said. "She'll explain when you talk to her. What I'll tell you is that what she said, verbatim, when I mentioned Victor Harrison's name was, 'Tell me you have documentation.'" The 3 other men were watching Emily. She said very quietly, "I have documentation." Marcus nodded. Then he said, "I think we need to find somewhere air-conditioned and sit down, because this conversation just got significantly more complicated and significantly more important than a motorcycle sale." Jackson put his hand briefly on Emily's shoulder, one firm, brief point of contact, and then dropped it. "Come on," he said. "There's a diner about 4 miles up the road that's tolerable. You can tell us everything, all of it, and then we'll figure out what comes next." Emily looked at the Road King one more time. Her father had bought it for $3,000 from a man who didn't know what he had. He had spent 10 years turning it into something worth $30,000. Not because he was trying to make money, but because that was simply how James Carter did things. All the way or not at all. She got in her car, the borrowed one, the one Dana had let her use since she sold her own, and she followed 4 motorcycles down Route 84 toward a diner she'd never been to, with a phone call waiting for her that might mean everything, or might mean nothing, or might mean something in between that she didn't have a name for yet. The desert stretched out on all sides, flat and immense and absolutely indifferent to what was happening inside any of the small human lives moving across its surface. But inside Emily Carter, something was moving that had not moved in 4 months. It felt like the moment before an engine catches. That particular instant when everything is aligned, the fuel and the spark and the timing, when the machine is about to speak. Her father had loved that moment best of all. She gripped the steering wheel and kept driving. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and something that had been on the griddle since early morning. And Emily did not care about any of it because she had been sitting in the corner booth for 11 minutes waiting for her phone to ring, and every minute felt like it was made of something heavier than the one before it. Jackson sat across from her. Pete and Sal had taken the booth beside them. Marcus was at the counter, his back to the room. Already on his second call, she could see him by the way his shoulders were set, the particular stillness of a man who is listening hard and processing harder. You want coffee? Jackson asked. I want my phone to ring, Emily said. I know. But the call's coming regardless of whether you're caffeinated. She exhaled and nodded, and the waitress brought 2 cups without being asked, which was the kind of thing that happened in diners on desert highways where the staff could read a table in 3 seconds flat. Emily wrapped both hands around the cup and said, "What did Marcus mean when he said the witness recanted? In the class action 2 years ago?" "I don't know the details," Jackson said. "Rachel will. But if someone already tried to take Victor down and it failed, it stalled," Jackson said. "There's a difference. A case that stalls because a witness gets scared isn't the same as a case that loses on the merits. It means the foundation was there. It means someone knew what Victor was doing before you did. It means you're not the first person who saw it. That's supposed to comfort me. It's supposed to tell you that you're walking into something with more history than you knew about. That's not a threat. That's leverage." Emily stared at her coffee. Victor knew someone was building a case against him 2 years ago, and he kept operating. Men like Victor, Jackson said, don't stop because someone gets close. They stop when someone gets all the way there. Her phone rang. She picked it up before the second vibration. "Emily Carter?" The voice on the other end was crisp, direct, the kind of voice that did not waste words and expected the same from whoever it was speaking to. "Yes, this is Rachel Morgan. I understand you worked at Harrison Custom Garage and you have documentation of wage theft and customer billing fraud going back approximately 5 years. That's correct. And you were terminated 4 months ago following a report to the Arizona Labor Board and the ROC. Yes." A pause. Not hesitation calculation. "Tell me exactly what you have," Rachel said. "Not what you think you have. What you physically possess or can access. Documents, photographs, copies, digital files. Be specific." Emily had been through this in her head so many times it came out clean and organized. The way you recite something you've rehearsed in the dark at 3 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. "I have copies of 14 customer invoices where the final charge was between 18 and 60% higher than my written estimates. I have those side by side with the customer estimates, so the discrepancy is visible. I have timekeeping records I photographed over a 3-month period showing 12 employees being clocked out before their actual shift end with the specific dates and times and the amounts that were shorted. I have a log I kept personally, handwritten, dated and signed, that documents every instance I observed and reported internally before I went to the labor board. And I have photographs I took of what appeared to be a secondary set of billing records or storage room physical files, paper, with customer names and insurance claim numbers that don't match the official records I had access to. Silence, not a brief silence, a silence that had weight and dimension. "The photographs of the secondary records," Rachel said. "How clear are they?" "Clear enough to read the claim numbers and the customer names. The amounts are visible on most of them. I took 27 photographs on 2 different occasions. You went back a second time. I knew the first time wasn't enough. I went back 3 weeks later and got better angles. How did you access the storage room?" "I had a key as part of my job. I was authorized to be in there. I wasn't authorized to photograph the records, but I was absolutely authorized to be in that space." "That distinction matters," Rachel said. And Emily could hear the sharp edge of professional interest in her voice now, not just attention, but the specific focus of someone who has just seen something she needed to see. "The photographs were taken without authorization, but in a location you had lawful access to. That's not a slam dunk on admissibility, but it's workable." "What format are the photos in?" "JPEG files on my phone with the original metadata intact. Date, time, location data, everything. You haven't altered them." "I wouldn't know how even if I wanted to." Another pause. "Emily," Rachel said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. When you left Harrison Custom Garage, did you take any physical documents?" "Not photographs, actual paper records," Emily said. "No. Everything I have is what I observed and documented while I was there, and copies of documents I was legitimately handling as part of my job that I made before I submitted them to the labor board." "All right," A breath. Now I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it carefully. 2 years ago, I had a client named Sandra Kelleher. She was a bookkeeper at Harrison Custom Garage for 3 years. She brought me what she described as substantial evidence of the same pattern you're describing. We built a case. We had a hearing date. 10 days before the hearing, Sandra called me and told me she was withdrawing. She said she had reconsidered and felt she had misunderstood what she'd seen. The words sat in the air like something dropped from a height. Emily said, "She didn't misunderstand." "No," Rachel said. "She didn't. Whatever Victor said to her or did to her in those 10 days before the hearing, I never found out. She moved out of Tucson within a month. The case collapsed. Victor's attorney filed for dismissal on the basis that the primary witness had recanted, and the judge granted it. Emily felt something go very cold in her stomach. "He scared her off," she said. "I believe so. I can't prove it, which is why what you're telling me matters as much as it does. You are not a single witness. You have documentation that is independent of testimony. And if the same patterns appear in your records that appeared in Sandra's." "They will," Emily said. "If she was there 3 years ago and I was there 2 years after that, the pattern would be consistent. Emily, I want to meet with you in person. Tomorrow morning, if you can make it to Phoenix." Emily looked at Jackson. He was watching her face and reading it the way he'd read The Road King, not touching. Just looking, taking in everything. "I can make it to Phoenix," she said. 8 o'clock. I'll send you the address. Bring everything you have. Physical copies if you can print them, plus the originals. Don't email anything to me before we meet. I want to see the metadata on those photos in person before we discuss anything digital. Okay? One more thing, Rachel said. Has anyone contacted you since you filed the complaints? Anyone from Victor's side, an attorney, someone claiming to represent the company? Anyone? Emily hesitated for exactly point. Rachel caught it. Emily, 3 weeks after I filed, Emily said, "I got a call from a man who said he was a consultant working with Harrison Custom Garage. He said Victor was open to resolving the situation privately and that there might be a settlement available if I agreed to withdraw my complaints and sign a non-disclosure agreement." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed to think about it. And then I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers." A short silence. "Good," Rachel said. "That was exactly right. Don't answer any calls from unknown numbers between now and tomorrow morning. If anyone contacts you, anyone do not agree to anything. Do not discuss anything. Call me immediately." She gave Emily her direct cell number. 8 o'clock tomorrow, Rachel said. "Don't be late." The call ended. Emily set the phone down on the table and looked at Jackson. "She's met Victor before," Emily said. "Sounds like it. He scared off her witness. He made a case disappear." "He did," Jackson said. "And then you showed up with better evidence." Emily wrapped her hands around the coffee cup again. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed that deliberately. She had expected them to shake, and they were not. "There was a settlement offer," she said. 3 weeks after I filed. I didn't tell anyone about it." Jackson nodded slowly. "How much?" The man didn't name a number. He said they were open to resolving it. I think if I'd stayed on the phone, there would have been a number. Victor was worried enough to reach out, or he was fishing, trying to figure out what I actually had. "Both things can be true," Jackson said. Pete had apparently been listening from the next booth. He leaned over the partition and said, without preamble, he offered a settlement within 3 weeks of the complaint filing. That means he knew what was in those complaints, which means someone at the labor board or the ROC told him. Emily turned to look at Pete. "That's not possible," she said. "Those complaints are confidential during investigation." Pete looked at her steadily. He was not a gentle-faced man. He had the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors and showed it, but there was nothing unkind in his expression. "Complaints are confidential," he said. "People aren't always." The implications settled over the table. If Victor had someone inside a contact at the agency, someone he paid or pressured, or simply had a relationship with, then he had known from the beginning what Emily had filed. And if he'd known from the beginning, he'd had 4 months to prepare, to build his counter-narrative, to make sure That whatever Emily said about him was already undermined before it reached anyone who could act on it. Emily said, very quietly, if that's true, then he knows exactly what documentation I submitted to the labor board. He knows what's in my complaint, but he doesn't know what I didn't include. Jackson looked at her sharply. What didn't you include? The photographs, Emily said. I filed written descriptions of what I observed in the storage room. But I didn't submit the actual photos to the labor board because I wasn't sure of the legal implications. I just described what I saw. Victor knows I was in that room. He knows I saw something. But he doesn't know I have 27 photographs. The booth was quiet. Marcus had finished his call and appeared at the end of the table. He had the look of a man who had just organized several thoughts into a shape that satisfied him. If he doesn't know about the photos, Marcus said, then whatever preparation he's done has a significant gap in it. That's what I'm thinking, Emily said. Rachel Morgan needs to know this tonight, not tomorrow morning. Tonight. Emily reached for her phone. She called Rachel back. Rachel answered on the first ring, which told Emily that she had been waiting. There's something I didn't tell you, Emily said. The photographs, I never mentioned them in my labor board filing. I only described what I saw in the storage room in written terms. Victor may not know the photos exist. Another one of Rachel's weighted silences. Are you certain you never mentioned photographs specifically in any filing or any conversation with anyone at the regulatory agencies? Certain, Emily said. I was worried about the legality of taking them. I didn't want to hand Victor a way to discredit the rest of my complaint by raising a question about the photos. So I kept them separate. Emily, Rachel said. And for the first time there was something in her voice that was not entirely professional, a crack of something human running underneath the crisp competence. What you just told me changes the shape of tomorrow's meeting considerably. Good or bad? Good, Rachel said. Significantly good. Don't talk to anyone else tonight about this case. Anyone, can you do that? Yes. 8 o'clock, Rachel said again. And this time it sounded less like a scheduled appointment and more like a starting gun. Emily put the phone down. She looked at the 4 men around her and in the booth beside her, and she felt, for the first time, something she recognized from years of mechanical work, the specific satisfaction of a diagnosis confirmed. The moment when you've traced the problem to its source, when the invisible has become visible, when you know exactly what you're dealing with and why. The problem was real. The evidence was real. And the gap in Victor Harrison's preparation was real. Now came the harder part. I need to call my brother, she said. Ryan answered on the 3rd ring, which meant he had been awake. He was usually awake. The condition he was dealing with made sleep complicated and unreliable. And Emily had grown accustomed to calls at strange hours and the particular alertness in his voice that came from a body that wouldn't let itself rest. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. How are you feeling? A pause. Did you sell the bike? Emily looked out the window of the diner. She could see the road, flat and long in both directions. Not yet, she said. His voice went careful. He was 17, and he had learned careful the hard way. I told you not to do that. I told you I'd figure something out. You don't have to figure anything out. You love that bike. I love you more than the bike. That's not. He stopped. That's not how it's supposed to work. You're 21. You're not supposed to be selling Dad's stuff for me. Ryan, she said, and her voice was steady, which surprised her. I need you to listen to me. I went out there today to sell the bike, and something happened that I didn't expect. I'm not selling the bike. I'm working on a different solution, and it's moving, and I need you to trust me for the next 5 days. Silence. What kind of different solution? I found people who are helping me. Good people. And I have a meeting tomorrow that could change things. If it doesn't work, then we figure out something else, she said. But Ryan, I need you to hear this. You are not the reason I'm in this situation. The reason I'm in this situation is a man who stole from people and then stole from me when I tried to stop him. That is his debt, not yours. And I am going to make sure it gets paid. She heard him breathe. Slow and careful, the way he breathed when he was trying not to let her hear that he was scared. 5 days, he said. 5 days, she confirmed. Can you hold on for 5 more days? I've been holding on, he said quietly. I'm good at it. She closed her eyes for a second. I know you are, she said. Dad would be proud of how good you are at it. The line was quiet for a moment. Tell me about the people who are helping, Ryan said. And she did. She told him about Route 84 and the handwritten sign and 4 motorcycles pulling into a gas station. She told him about Jackson, who had looked at her, the way their father used to look at a troubled engine steady and patient, certain the diagnosis was findable if you took enough time. She told him about Marcus and the phone call with Rachel and the 27 photographs that Victor Harrison didn't know existed. Ryan listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he said, Bikers. Yes, Hell's Angels, yes. Dad would have loved that, Ryan said. And Emily laughed, a real laugh, the first one in weeks, because she knew exactly what her brother meant. James Carter had believed, with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had ridden his whole life, that the biker community operated by a moral code that most polished, professional people had traded away somewhere along the way. You take care of your own, he used to say, and everybody good enough to earn it becomes your own. He would have loved it, Emily agreed. She got back to Tucson at 6:30 that evening. She had a box under her bed. She had put it there 3 months ago, and she had not opened it since, because opening it meant looking at everything she had documented and everything she had tried to do and everything that had been done to her in return. And there were nights when she simply could not afford to feel all of that at once. She opened it now. The documents were organized the way a mechanic organizes a toolbox, everything in its exact place. No wasted space, accessible in the order you needed it. Her father had taught her that too. A disorganized workspace is a disorganized mind, he used to say. She laid everything out on the kitchen table. 14 customer estimates beside 14 final invoices. The discrepancies were visible at a glance. If you knew what you were looking at, and any experienced attorney would know. The timekeeping log, 12 employees, 87 individual entries, each one with a date, a name, a scheduled end time, an actual departure time, and the gap between them. 3 months of careful documentation, the kind that a person produces when they know they're building something that has to hold up. Her personal journal, not a diary. Just a spiral notebook she'd bought at a pharmacy with handwritten entries going back to the first month she'd noticed something wrong. She had numbered the entries and dated everyone. Her handwriting was not beautiful, but it was consistent and legible. The handwriting of someone who had spent years filling out service logs and parts orders. And the photographs. She scrolled through them on her phone. 27 images. Some of them were slightly blurred at the edges. She had been moving quickly. One eye on the door, but the central content of each image was clear. Claim numbers, customer names, amounts, dates. The discrepancy between what was billed to insurance companies and what the official shop records showed was visible in the photographs as plainly as it would have been in person. Victor Harrison had built his fraud carefully and hidden it in paper because paper felt safe to men of his generation. It felt solid and private and immune to the vulnerability of digital records that could be hacked or subpoenaed remotely. He had put his paper files in a locked back room and trusted the key to control. He had not counted on a 21-year-old mechanic who had learned from a father who loved her that the truth was worth the trouble of keeping. She printed everything she had. The printer in Dana's apartment, 2 doors down, was willing, and Dana herself appeared in the doorway of Emily's apartment at 8:15 with a glass of wine she had not asked for. You look like you're preparing for war, Dana said. I'm preparing for a meeting, Emily said, with lawyers. One lawyer. Tomorrow morning. In Phoenix. Dana sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the organized stacks of paper and did not touch any of it. Tell me what happened today, Dana said. So Emily told her. The same story she had told Ryan, but differently. Dana was practical and direct and did not need the emotional framing. She needed the sequence of events and the logic underneath them, which was exactly how Dana processed the world. When Emily finished, Dana said, this attorney, Rachel Morgan, you looked her up? Not yet. Dana had her phone out before Emily finished the sentence. Rachel Morgan, Employment Law, Phoenix, Arizona. Dana read. 14 years in practice. Board certified in labor and employment law. Formerly with the Arizona Attorney General's office. She's won 3 significant wage theft cases in the last 5 years, and she's been quoted in 2 Arizona Republic articles about wage theft enforcement. A pause. She has a 5-star rating on every platform that rates attorneys, which means nothing by itself, but combined with the AG's office background and the board certification, she's legitimate, Emily said. She's more than legitimate. She's exactly who you'd want for this. Dana put the phone down. What do you actually think is going to happen? Honestly, not the hopeful version, the realistic version. Emily thought about that. Realistically, she said, Rachel sees what I have and tells me it's not enough. The photographs have a legal question mark over them. The timekeeping records are my word against Victor's payroll system. The invoices could be explained by legitimate scope changes that weren't documented. Each piece individually has a weakness, but all of them together is a pattern, Emily said. And the pattern matches what Rachel's previous client had, which is what she's going to compare it against. If the pattern from 3 years ago matches the pattern from 2 years later, that's not coincidence or misunderstanding. That's a business model. Dana was quiet. And Ryan's treatment, she said. The money. That's the part I don't know yet, Emily admitted. Rachel might be able to file for an emergency injunction. She might be able to get an expedited settlement. She mentioned that Victor reaching out 3 weeks after my filing was significant. It means he wanted this closed quietly, which means he might want it closed quietly enough to pay for it. Or, Dana said carefully, he might decide he's already scared off one witness, and he can do the same with you. The apartment was quiet. Emily said, he can try. Dana looked at her for a long moment. You're different today, Dana said. Since you got back. I know. What happened out there? Besides the practical stuff, Emily thought about how to answer that. She thought about Jackson saying, give me 24 hours and meaning it the way that very few people meant anything. She thought about Marcus saying the third one ended differently. She thought about Pete quietly noting that Victor had known about her complaint within 3 weeks and what that implied. Someone looked at my situation, Emily said, and didn't tell me there was nothing to be done. They just started figuring out what could be done. It's been 4 months since anyone did that. Dana nodded slowly. Your dad used to do that, she said. I know. He'd look at a broken engine and everyone else would say it was done, and he'd just start going through it piece by piece until he found the thing that was actually wrong. I know, Emily said again, and her voice was steady. Dana reached across the table and put her hand briefly over Emily's. The kind of contact that does not ask anything. It just confirms that someone is there. Then she pulled back. Get some sleep, Dana said. You have to be in Phoenix by 8. I know. And Dana stood to leave. You're not going to need to sell the bike. Emily didn't answer. But after Dana left, she sat at the kitchen table with the organized stacks of paper and the printed photographs and her handwritten journal. And she looked at all of it for a long time. She thought about Victor Harrison sitting in his office right now. She thought about whether he believed it was over. Whether he had looked at her 4 months of silence and told himself she had run out of momentum, run out of money, run out of fight. Whether he was sleeping easily tonight. She thought about the second set of billing files, paper in a locked room, the particular arrogance of a man who hides something carefully and then forgets that careful is not the same as invisible. She thought about 27 photographs with intact metadata sitting on her phone. She thought about Sandra Kelleher, who had tried first and been frightened away, and who had moved out of Tucson within a month of withdrawing her case. And she thought about something her father had said once in the shop when she was 14 years old and frustrated because an engine she had been working on for 2 weeks refused to cooperate. The machine isn't fighting you, he'd said, wiping his hands on a rag. It's just telling you there's something you haven't found yet. Keep looking. You'll find it. She had kept looking. She had found it. And tomorrow morning in Phoenix, She was going to show it to the one person who knew how to use it. She packed the documents into a folder, careful, organized, in the exact order she planned to present them, and set it by the door. She set an alarm for 5 o'clock. And then Emily Carter, 21 years old, daughter of James Carter, who had built a perfect machine with honest hands, lay down on her bed, fully clothed, and fell asleep inside of 4 minutes, which was the fastest she had slept in 4 months. Outside, the Arizona night was exactly as it always was, vast and dark and indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding beneath it. But in the morning, something was going to shift. She could feel it the way her father had taught her to feel an engine before you started it, not with your hands, not with any instrument, just with the particular attention of someone who knows what they're listening for. The machine was about to speak. She was in Rachel Morgan's office at 7:58. She knew that because she checked her phone when she walked in, the same way she checked a torque spec before she tightened a bolt, not because she doubted herself, but because precision was a habit she had never been able to turn off. Rachel Morgan was already at her desk. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she actually wore. And she stood when Emily came in and extended her hand across the desk with the directness of someone who did not perform warmth, but had the real thing available when it was warranted. "You printed everything," Rachel said, looking at the folder Emily set on the desk. "You said bring physical copies." "I did." Rachel sat down and pulled the folder toward her without opening it yet. "And the originals are on your phone?" "Yes." "Good. Before we go through any of this, I need to ask you something I should have asked last night." Rachel looked at her directly. "Has anyone contacted you since we spoke? Unknown number? Text anything?" "No." "All right." Rachel opened the folder. What happened in the next 40 minutes was one of the most concentrated experiences of Emily's life, and she had spent 3 months documenting fraud while pretending to work normally inside the shop that was committing it, so her threshold for concentration under pressure was not low. Rachel went through every document without speaking. She read each page with the full weight of her attention, occasionally setting something aside, occasionally picking it back up to compare it against something else. She held 2 invoices side by side for almost a full minute without saying anything. When she reached the printed photographs, she looked at each one carefully, then looked at Emily, then looked at the photographs again. She did not say anything until she had been through everything once and then gone back through the flagged documents a second time. Then she closed the folder, took off her glasses, and said, "Walk me through the second time you photographed the storage room." Specifically, Emily walked her through it. The date, which she remembered exactly. The time, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday when Victor was at a client site and the shop foreman was in the front office. The specific files she had photographed and why she chose those particular ones. The fact that she had taken a screenshot of her phone's clock before she started photographing and after she finished. So the timing was verifiable. Rachel listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, Rachel said, "You took a screenshot of the clock before and after. My father always said, document the documentation," Emily said. "I wasn't sure if it applied here, but I did it anyway." Something moved across Rachel's face. Not quite a smile, too controlled for that, but the particular expression of an attorney who has just been handed something that changes the geometry of a case. "Emily," Rachel said, "I want to tell you something about the case from 2 years ago. Sandra Kelleher came to me with testimony. Detailed, credible testimony. What she did not have was a single piece of physical evidence that Victor couldn't challenge. Everything she knew, she had seen, but she hadn't documented it in real time. With metadata, with corroborating timestamps, with parallel records that could be verified independently. He could say she was misremembering," Emily said. "He could say she was misremembering. She was disgruntled. She was confused about what she'd seen. And once he scared her into recanting, the testimony evaporated. There was nothing left that existed outside her account." Rachel tapped the closed folder. "What you have here exists completely independent of your testimony. These invoices don't require you to remember anything. These photographs don't depend on your credibility. The timestamps are embedded in the file itself. If Victor tries to say you fabricated these, he's calling his own shop's records fraudulent, which defeats his entire defense. Emily had known this. She had understood it in principle. But hearing it from Rachel, in the context of what Sandra Kelleher had not had, made it real in a different way. "Can you take the case?" Emily said. "I already have," Rachel said simply. "The question is how we move." She stood up and went to the window, not looking out of it, just moving. The way people move when they're organizing their thoughts into an order that other people can follow. "There are 3 tracks," she said. "First track, the labor complaint you already filed. I'm going to contact the investigator assigned to your case today and advise them of new evidence. Specifically, I'm going to advise them that the investigation may have been compromised by an information leak, and I'm going to request immediate escalation to the investigator's supervisor. That puts the agency on notice that we know about the leak." Emily went still. "You're going to tell them we think someone inside tipped Victor off? I'm going to make sure they understand that the timing of the settlement contact 3 weeks after your filing is something we find significant. I won't accuse anyone I can't prove, but I will make sure the right people are paying attention to their own conduct." Rachel paused. "Track 2, the ROC complaint, which I'm going to supplement with the customer billing evidence and request a formal audit of Harrison Custom Garage's insurance billing records for the past 5 years. That audit, if granted, will independently surface the discrepancy between the official shop records and what your photographs show in the secondary files. That's the moment where Victor's paper system collapses on itself because the 2 sets of records can't both be right." "And the third track?" Emily said. Rachel turned from the window. "Emily, what Victor did to you after you reported him the calls to other shops. The reputation campaign, the specific language he used, that is textbook or retaliatory termination under Arizona employment law. And based on what you've described, I believe he also made materially false statements about you to third parties in your professional community. That's defamation, combined with tortious interference with your business relationships." She said it calmly. "The way you state a fact, we're going to file a civil suit, not eventually. Within the next 72 hours. The room was quiet. 72 hours, Emily said. "The filing itself isn't what solves your brother's situation," Rachel said. "But the filing, combined with the regulatory actions, combined with the fact that Victor already reached out for a settlement, once that creates a situation where his attorney is going to advise him very strongly that fighting this is more expensive than settling it. And I intend to make sure that settlement, if it comes, covers everything. Your lost wages, your future earnings impact, the damage to your professional reputation, and what you need for Ryan." Emily's hands were flat on her knees. She was pressing them down deliberately, not from nerves, she realized, but from a kind of energy she didn't have a name for yet. The energy of something moving. "What are his attorneys going to do when you file?" she said. "They'll respond. They'll file motions. They'll try to challenge the photographs. They'll try to argue scope change on the billing records. They'll try to frame the timekeeping discrepancies as a software error. That's standard." Rachel sat back down. "What they won't be able to do is make the pattern disappear. Because the pattern in your documentation matches the pattern Sandra Kelleher described 2 years ago. And when I contact Sandra, which I intend to do this week, I believe she may be willing to come back now that she's not alone." Emily looked at her. "You think she'll come back?" "I think," Rachel said carefully, "that Sandra Kelleher has been living with what she did for 2 years. I think the fact that someone else found the same evidence independently, someone Victor couldn't stop before they got out safely, might be exactly what she needed to feel safe enough to try again." Emily had not thought about Sandra Kelleher as a person until this moment. She had been an abstraction, a previous witness, a cautionary tale, a gap in the case. Now, Emily thought about a woman who had seen what she had seen, tried what she had tried, and been frightened into silence, who had moved out of Tucson, who had been carrying that for 2 years. "Tell her about the photographs," Emily said. When you call her, tell her he didn't know. Tell her there's a piece of this he never saw coming. Rachel looked at Emily steadily. I will, she said. Emily was back in her car at 9:40. She sat in the parking structure for a moment before she started the engine. Not because she was overwhelmed, she had expected to feel overwhelmed, and she didn't, but because she needed 60 seconds to absorb the shape of what had just changed. 3 tracks, 72 hours to a civil filing, a regulatory audit, a potential second witness who might come back. And Victor Harrison sitting in his shop in Tucson, not knowing about 27 photographs. She called Jackson. He answered immediately, which meant he had been waiting for the call, which she found unexpectedly stabilizing. How did it go, he said. She took the case, Emily said. She's filing a civil suit within 72 hours. She's supplementing both regulatory complaints, and she thinks the previous witness might come back. A beat of silence. That's a lot of movement for one morning, Jackson said. She was ready. She'd been ready for 2 years. I just gave her what she needed to go. Where are you now? Parking structure on 5th and Campbell. About to drive back to Tucson. Don't go straight home, Jackson said. I need you to meet someone first. Emily went still. Who? His name is Daniel Brooks. He worked at Harrison Custom Garage for 7 years as a senior mechanic. He was one of the employees whose hours were being shorted. He left the shop about a year ago, and he's been sitting on records he kept because he didn't know what to do with them or who to trust. Emily's grip tightened on the phone. How do you know Daniel Brooks? She said. Because, Jackson said, Pete spent last night making phone calls. When you work the roads as long as we have, you know people in every shop, in every city, in this corridor. Pete knew a man who knew Daniel. And Daniel has been waiting for someone to come to him with the right questions for a long time. Emily pressed her eyes closed for 1 second. He kept records, she said. He kept records, Jackson confirmed. He described them to Pete as 4 years' worth of payroll documentation that doesn't match what the official records show, a list of customer complaints that were resolved off-book, and something he called the number. What number? He wouldn't tell Pete over the phone. He said he'd only discuss it in person with the person who was building the case. Emily's voice came out flat and very precise. Text me the address. Daniel Brooks met her at a diner she would never have found without the address. The kind of place that existed in the part of a city that people only knew if they lived or worked there. He was 53 years old, broad through the chest, with the permanently calloused hands of a man who had worked with engines his entire adult life. He had the specific wariness of someone who had been sitting on something heavy for a long time and had developed the habit of checking the room before he spoke. He looked at Emily when she sat down across from him, and he said, "You're James Carter's daughter." Emily said, "Yes. Your father's reputation got you the job at Harrison." It did. Daniel wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Your father was a good man. I met him twice at industry events. He was the kind of man you don't forget because there's nothing false about him." He paused. "When I heard Victor had gone after you the way he did the calls, the lies he was spreading, I wanted to do something about it. I didn't know how." "You're doing something about it now," Emily said. He nodded slowly. "Pete says you have a lawyer. Rachel Morgan, in Phoenix. She's filing a civil suit within 72 hours and supplementing both regulatory complaints. I need to call her today and tell her about you. I want to meet her before I hand over anything." "That's fair. I can arrange that." Emily looked at him steadily. "Pete said you have 4 years of payroll documentation." 4.5, he said. "I started keeping records 8 months into the job because I noticed my hours were wrong on my first paycheck, and Victor told me it was a processing error. The second paycheck had the same error. After the third one, I started writing everything down." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small notebook, worn soft at the edges, the kind that fits in a chest pocket. Every shift, every hour, every discrepancy. Date, time, amount. 4.5 years. Emily looked at the notebook. It was the same kind of notebook she had bought at the pharmacy, and something about that made her chest tighten in a way she had not expected. What's the total? She said. He looked at her steadily. Across all the employees I documented, not just me. I started tracking others after my second year. The total hours shorted over 4.5 years comes to approximately $43,000 in unpaid wages. That's a conservative estimate. And that's just the workers I had direct visibility to. Emily was very still. That's not all, Daniel said. She waited. The customer fraud, he said. The insurance billing scheme. I know about it because one of the customers came back. About 2 years ago, a man named Gerald Cook brought his truck in for an insurance claim after a collision. The insurance company paid out what the shop billed. 2 months later, Gerald's insurance company did a routine audit of the claim and reached out to him with questions about specific parts that were listed on the invoice. Gerald was confused because he didn't know what those parts were. He came back to the shop. Daniel's voice did not change in volume or pace, but something in it hardened. I was the one who talked to him. Victor wasn't there. Gerald showed me his invoice and asked me to explain what those parts were because his insurance company was asking and he didn't understand the terminology. And the parts weren't real, Emily said. 3 of the 6 line items on his invoice were either parts that were never installed or labor that was never performed. I recognized it immediately because I had done the actual repair. I knew what we'd actually done on that truck. Daniel set the notebook down on the table between them. I sent Gerald home, and I told him to respond to his insurance company's questions honestly. And then I wrote down every detail of that conversation in this notebook. Emily looked at the notebook. You documented a specific incident, she said. A specific customer, a specific invoice, specific false line items, verified by the mechanic who did the actual repair. Yes, Gerald Cook, she said. Do you know if he's still in the area? He's in Tucson. I looked him up 6 months ago. I had this half-formed idea of doing something with what I knew, but I didn't have anyone to take it to who I trusted. He looked at her. Then Pete called. Emily picked up her phone and called Rachel. Rachel answered before the second ring. There's a development, Emily said. I'm sitting across from a senior mechanic who worked at Harrison Custom Garage for 4.5 years. He has a handwritten log documenting $43,000 in unpaid wages across multiple employees. He also documented a specific instance of insurance fraud with a customer who can be contacted independently. The customer's name is Gerald Cook. The silence on Rachel's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Put him on, Rachel said. Emily handed the phone across the table to Daniel Brooks. He took it with the hands of a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to pick up the other end. The call lasted 22 minutes. Emily sat across from Daniel and watched his face as he talked the careful way he answered Rachel's questions. The precision of a man who had been organizing these facts in his head for years and finally had someone asking for them in the right order. He named dates. He named amounts. He named the specific employees he had documented. When Rachel asked about Gerald Cook, Daniel recited the man's address from memory. When the call ended, Daniel handed the phone back to Emily. She wants me in Phoenix on Thursday, he said. Are you willing to go? He picked up the notebook from the table. He held it for a moment, the weight of 4.5 years in his palm. Then he looked at Emily. Victor shorted my wages by over $6,000 across 4.5 years, he said. I let it go because I needed the job and I didn't know how to fight it. I documented it because I'm not the kind of man who lets wrong things happen without at least writing them down. He put the notebook back on the table. And then I watched him destroy your career because you did the right thing. A 21-year-old kid who learned her trade from her father and had the spine to report what she saw. Emily did not look away. I'm going to Phoenix on Thursday, Daniel said, and I'm bringing the notebook. She reached across the table and shook his hand. It was the second handshake in 2 days that felt like something more than a transaction, like an agreement between people who had decided, separately and then together, that the cost of doing nothing had got higher than the cost of doing something. Outside, the Phoenix midday pressed down on the city without apology. Emily walked to her car with the particular gait of someone who has just added a significant piece to a structure they've been building in the dark, moving faster, not because they're running, but because the direction has finally become clear. She called Jackson from the car. "Daniel's in," she said. "Good man," Jackson said, and she could hear that he meant it. "There's a customer, too. Gerald Cook." Victor fraudulently billed his insurance company, and Daniel documented it at the time. "If we can get Gerald's cooperation, I'll have Pete make a call," Jackson said. "He knows how to talk to people who don't know yet that they want to talk." "There's something else," Emily said. "The total wage theft Daniel documented, $43,000 across multiple employees. That's just what one man was able to track without the payroll system access. The actual number across all the employees Victor shorted over 15 years could be significant," Jackson said. "It changes what this is," Emily said. "This isn't just my case anymore. This is 12, maybe 20 employees who were stolen from. Gerald Cook and however many other customers who paid for work that wasn't done. This is 15 years of a business model built on theft." She heard Jackson exhale. "Emily," he said, "it was never just your case. That's what I tried to tell you on Route 84. She drove. The highway opened up ahead of her, flat and long, and she thought about something she had not let herself think about directly until this moment. What it would mean to win. Not just to get the money for Ryan, though. That was still the beating heart of all of this. The thing that made every other consideration secondary, but to actually take apart what Victor Harrison had built. To make it visible. To put the names of the people he had stolen from into a record that could not be ignored. Her father had believed in records. He had believed that honest documentation was a form of respect, that writing something down carefully and accurately was a way of saying this happened, and it matters, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She thought about Sandra Kelleher, who had tried to document the same things and been scared into silence. She thought about Daniel Brooks, sitting alone with a notebook for 4.5 years. She thought about the 12 employees whose stolen wages existed only in Daniel's careful handwriting because the official payroll records had been manipulated to say something else. She thought about Gerald Cook, who had come back to the shop with a confused question about parts he didn't recognize and had been sent home without knowing that the mechanic he'd talked to had written everything down. Victor Harrison had built his system on the assumption that each victim was isolated. That Emily didn't know Daniel, that Daniel didn't know Gerald, that Sandra Kelleher didn't know any of them, that the dispossessed and frightened and professionally destroyed would stay exactly where he had put them, separate, silent, unable to find each other. He had not counted on a gas station on Route 84. He had not counted on 4 motorcycles. He had not counted on Pete making phone calls through a network of people who knew every shop in every city in the corridor, the kind of network built over decades of people helping each other because that was what you did. Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it at a red light. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She pulled over. The text read, "I heard from Jackson's group. My name is Laura Bennett. I was the accountant at Harrison Custom Garage until 3 years ago. I have financial records. I think you need to see them." Emily read it twice. Then she called Rachel. "There's a third person," she said, "a former accountant named Laura Bennett. She has financial records." Rachel's voice, when it came, was the voice of a woman who has spent 14 years in law and knows exactly what a case looks like when it reaches critical mass. "Call her back," Rachel said. "Right now. And Emily, don't drive. Pull over and make this call. Whatever Laura Bennett has to say, you want to hear every word." Emily was already pulled over. She hung up with Rachel and called Laura Bennett. The phone rang once. "Emily?" A woman's voice. "Careful." The voice of someone who had been careful for a long time. "Laura," Emily said. "Tell me about the financial records." A long breath on the other end of the line. "I was Victor's accountant for 4 years," Laura said. "When I left 3 years ago, I took copies of the documents I had worked on that I believed showed financial misconduct. I took them because I was afraid not of Victor personally, but of losing the record, of it all just disappearing because the right people never saw it." "What kind of documents?" "Bank records, wire transfers, A pattern of payments to shell companies that I could never reconcile to actual vendors. Payments that don't correspond to any legitimate business expense I could identify. She paused. Emily, I think some of the insurance fraud proceeds were being moved through those companies. I was never able to prove it alone. But if your photographs show what Jackson's people described, and if Daniel Brooks's timekeeping records exist the way they say they do, they exist, Emily said. I've seen them. Laura was quiet for a moment. Then the financial records are the missing piece, she said. What I have shows where the money went. What you and Daniel have shows where the money came from. Together, it's not just labor violations and consumer fraud. It's a financial crime. Emily felt the ground shift under her in a way that was not frightening but should have been. Rachel Morgan, Emily said. My attorney in Phoenix. She needs to talk to you tonight. I know who Rachel Morgan is, Laura said quietly. I went to her 2 years ago, before Sandra Kelleher's case fell apart. I was going to come forward then. And then Sandra recanted, and I thought if Victor could scare off a primary witness that quickly, what would he do to me? A pause. I've been keeping these records in a storage unit outside Tucson for 3 years. I've been paying the monthly fee and telling myself that someday the right moment would come. The right moment is now, Emily said. I know, Laura said. That's why I texted. Can you be in Phoenix on Thursday? I can be in Phoenix tomorrow, Laura said. I've been ready for 3 years. I just needed someone to open the door. Emily leaned her head back against the headrest and looked up at the ceiling of the borrowed car. 3 people. Daniel Brooks with his notebook. Laura Bennett with her financial records in a storage unit outside Tucson. Sandra Kelleher, somewhere she'd moved to after fleeing a situation she hadn't been able to fight alone. And Emily herself, with her 14 invoices and her 46 timekeeping entries and her 27 photographs. Each of them, alone, had been containable. Victor had contained them, one by one, through intimidation and timing and the isolation that came from not knowing anyone else was keeping the same truth. Together, they were something else entirely. She sent Jackson a text. There's a 4th person, former accountant. Financial records going back 3 years. She's coming to Phoenix tomorrow. His reply came in less than a minute. Your father built that bike piece by piece. Now you're doing the same thing. Emily stared at the message for a moment. Then she put the car in drive and headed back toward Tucson, toward Ryan and Dana, and the borrowed apartment, and the 5 days left on a deadline that had stopped feeling impossible sometime between 9:40 this morning and right now. The case was not just moving. It was breathing. And in a shop in Tucson, Victor Harrison did not know yet that the structure he had spent 15 years building, the careful, paper-hidden, isolated, intimidation-maintained structure of a man who believed he was too established to be touched, had just developed a crack that ran all the way to the foundation. Laura Bennett arrived in Phoenix at 7:15 the following morning, 45 minutes before her scheduled meeting with Rachel, which told Emily everything she needed to know about how long Laura had been waiting for this moment. She was 41 years old, quietly dressed, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, not from weakness, but from years of practicing invisibility as a survival strategy. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a banker's box under her arm, and when she set the box on Rachel's conference table, her hands were completely steady. Emily was already there. She had driven to Phoenix the night before and slept on a friend's couch rather than risk the early morning highway. When Laura walked in, their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them that did not require words, the specific recognition of 2 people who have been carrying the same weight in separate rooms for too long. You're Emily, Laura said, and you're the reason Victor's accountant position has been filled 3 times in 5 years, Emily said. Laura's expression shifted, surprised, then something that was almost a laugh. How did you know that? Marcus looked it up. 3 accountants in 5 years, all of whom left without explanation. You were the first one. Laura set the banker's box down carefully. The ones after me figured it out faster than I did. I gave him 4 years. I kept telling myself I was misreading things. She paused. I wasn't misreading things. Rachel came in 2 minutes later with her legal pad and her reading glasses and the focused energy of a woman who had not wasted a moment since Emily's call the previous afternoon. Daniel Brooks arrived directly behind her, the worn notebook already in his jacket pocket. He nodded at Emily, acknowledged Laura with a brief handshake, and sat down with the economy of motion of a man who had made his decision and was done deliberating. The four of them at that table, Rachel at the head, Emily and Daniel on one side, Laura on the other represented, between them, 8 years of accumulated evidence against Victor Harrison. 8 years of watching, documenting, carrying, waiting. Rachel looked at each of them in turn. Before we begin, she said, I want to tell you something. This morning at 7 o'clock, I received a call from the Arizona Labor Board investigator assigned to Emily's case. The investigator told me that following my inquiry yesterday about potential information compromise, the agency's internal review office is now conducting a preliminary assessment of how the case information was handled. They would not confirm a leak, but they reassigned Emily's case to a senior investigator. She paused. Victor Harrison no longer has a contact inside that process. Whatever protection he had there is gone. Daniel made a sound that was not quite a word. Laura pressed her lips together and looked at the table. Emily said nothing. She was thinking about the 3 weeks between her filing and the settlement call. She was thinking about the man who had called her and said Victor was open to resolving things quietly. She was thinking about how confident that call had sounded, the ease of a man who believed the ground under him was solid. Let's go through what we have, Rachel said. Laura, start with the financial records. Laura opened the banker's box. What came out of that box over the next 90 minutes was the architecture of a 15-year fraud made suddenly and completely visible. Laura had kept copies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and accounts payable documentation covering her 4 years at the shop. She had also obtained, through entirely legal means she explained carefully to Rachel, records from the Arizona Corporation Commission showing the registration history of 3 shell companies that had received regular payments from Harrison Custom Garage over the period she worked there. The shell companies had names that sounded like legitimate vendors. 2 of them referenced automotive supply. 1 referenced business consulting. All 3 had been registered with minimal documentation. None of them had verifiable physical addresses. All 3 had received payments totaling, over Laura's 4-year window alone, just over $240,000. Rachel wrote the number down and underlined it. These aren't legitimate vendor payments, Laura said, with the flat precision of someone who has looked at these numbers until they are burned into her memory. I know what legitimate vendor payments look like. I process them. These payments have no corresponding purchase orders, no delivery confirmations, no service agreements. They were generated through a secondary approval process that bypassed the normal documentation requirements. Who had authorization to approve that secondary process? Rachel asked. Victor alone, Laura said. You raised this internally? Once. In my 3rd year. I asked about one specific payment that I couldn't reconcile. Victor told me it was a consulting arrangement and the documentation was handled separately. I wrote it in my log and I let it go. She looked at Emily. I should have done what you did. I should have gone outside. You're here now, Emily said. Daniel had his notebook open. The timing of those payments, he said. Looking at Laura's records. The biggest payments, do they correspond to any particular time of year? Laura looked at him. 1st quarter and 3rd quarter, predominantly. Daniel turned to a section of his notebook. Those are the periods when I documented the highest number of wage discrepancies. The money was being shorted from employees in the same periods when the largest amounts were being moved to the shell companies. Rachel looked at both of them. You're saying the payroll theft and the shell company payments are connected by timing. I'm saying they're synchronized, Daniel said. The money shorted from workers went somewhere. The shell company payments are where? The room was quiet for a moment. Then Rachel said, very calmly, what you have just described is not civil fraud. What you have just described is a criminal enterprise. Emily felt the table shift. under her understanding of what this had become. She had started with a sign on a piece of cardboard. She had started with a brother who needed $42,000 in 5 days. She had started with the simple, devastating need to sell the last thing her father had loved in order to buy her brother more time. And now she was sitting in a room where 4 people had just assembled the evidence of a 15-year criminal operation. "Rachel," she said. "Ryan's deadline is in 4 days." Rachel looked at her. The attorney's face did not change, but her voice became, if possible, even more precise. "I know," she said. "Here's what happens today. The civil filing goes in by noon: retaliatory termination, defamation, tortious interference. That filing is public record the moment it's submitted, which means Victor's attorney will know about it within hours. Simultaneously, I'm contacting the Arizona Attorney General's office with a referral on the criminal fraud elements. The AG's office has a financial crimes unit. What Laura has brought me is exactly what that unit looks for. But the AG's office moving won't solve 4 days," Emily said. "No," Rachel said, "but the civil filing, combined with the regulatory actions, combined with the fact that we now have 3 independent witnesses and documentary evidence of a financial crime that is going to land on Victor Harrison's attorney's desk today like a building fell on it. And his attorney, who is a professional who understands what exposure looks like, is going to pick up the phone and call Victor and say words that Victor has never had to hear before." "What words?" Laura asked. "Something to the effect of," Rachel said, "that they need to discuss whether fighting this case is the most catastrophically expensive decision he has ever made." She picked up her pen. "I've been waiting 2 years to make this filing," she said. "Let's get to work." The civil complaint was filed at 11:47 that morning. Emily knew the exact time because she was sitting in the waiting area outside Rachel's office when Marcus texted her from Tucson. Victor's attorney's office just received the service notification. Pete's contact at the building says a silver BMW left the parking structure at the building where Harrison's attorney offices are located approximately 20 minutes ago, heading in the direction of Harrison Custom Garage. Emily stared at the text. Victor's attorney was driving to the shop. Not calling. Driving. She called Jackson. "His lawyer is driving to the shop," she said. "In person," Jackson said. And she could hear in his voice the particular satisfaction of a man who has seen this kind of moment before. "That means it's not a phone conversation. You don't drive to a client's location for a routine update. You drive there when you need to look them in the eye and tell them something they won't want to hear." "How long do you think before we hear something?" "Depends on how long Victor takes to stop arguing and start listening," Jackson said. "Men like Victor argue first. They rage and blame and tell their attorney it's all lies. That takes 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then the attorney lays out the numbers, the exposure, the evidence they can't challenge. The fact that the AG referral is sitting on a federal desk right now." A pause. "Victor will start listening somewhere around 40 minutes in." Emily looked at the clock on her phone. 12:03. "I'm going to sit here," she said. "I know you are," Jackson said. "I'll stay on the line." She almost told him he didn't have to. She stopped herself because it wasn't true, and they both knew it. She sat in the waiting area of Rachel Morgan's law office in Phoenix, Arizona, with her phone in her hand and Jackson Reed on the other end of the line, saying nothing in the particular way that some people know how to say nothing, present, steady, making the silence feel inhabited rather than empty. At 12:41, Rachel's assistant came to the door. "Miss Carter, Miss Morgan would like you to come back in." Rachel was standing when Emily came in. She did not sit down, which was unusual. Rachel was a desk person, a seated authority, and seeing her standing communicated something before she said a word. "I just received a call from Marcus Bellamy, who is Victor Harrison's attorney," Rachel said. "He indicated that his client is prepared to enter into settlement discussions. He asked what our timeline was." Emily's heart did something complicated. "What did you tell him?" "I told him our timeline was 4 days," Rachel said. "And I told him that we were not interested in extended negotiations. I told him that, given the criminal referral to the AG's office, which Victor's attorney was not aware of until I mentioned it just now, The window for a civil settlement that resolved everything cleanly was going to close. And once the AG's office opened a formal investigation, our ability to include certain elements in a civil resolution would be significantly constrained. Emily looked at her. You told him about the AG referral. I told him we had made a referral, Rachel said. I did not tell him what specific evidence we had provided. But Marcus Bellamy is not a foolish man. He heard criminal referral and financial crimes unit in the same sentence, and he understood immediately what category of problem his client is now facing. What did he say? He said he needed 2 hours with his client. Rachel finally sat down. Emily, I want to be honest with you about what a settlement at this stage looks like and what it doesn't look like. Victor Harrison is not going to write a check today for everything he owes every person he has stolen from over 15 years. That is not what civil settlement means. What it means is that he agrees to a structured resolution that covers the defined claims in our filing your wrongful termination, your lost wages, the defamation damage to your professional reputation, your restitution for economic harm, and in return we agree to terms that his attorney will negotiate hard on. What about Daniel and the other employees? Emily said. What about the $43,000 in stolen wages? That's a separate claim, Rachel said. Daniel and the other affected employees would need to file individually or as a class. I can represent them, and I intend to offer to do so. But that claim moves on its own timeline. And the criminal side? The AG's office moves independently. A civil settlement between you and Victor does not affect a criminal investigation. If the financial crimes unit finds what Laura's records suggest, Victor will face that separately, regardless of what we agree to today. Emily was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to ask for? She said. Rachel folded her hands on the desk. I'm going to ask for full restitution of your lost wages for 4 months, approximately $18,000 based on your prior salary. I'm going to ask for a professional restitution fund to cover the damage Victor did to your reputation calls to every shop he contacted, written retractions, a signed statement acknowledging your competence and integrity. I'm going to ask for damages for the defamation itself, and I'm going to ask for an amount sufficient to cover Ryan's treatment in full. She paused. The total demand I intend to present is $220,000. Emily heard the number and felt it land somewhere below her sternum. He'll push back, she said. Of course he will. His attorney will counter at something substantially lower, and we will negotiate. What I need you to understand is that the floor, the absolute minimum I will accept, covers Ryan's treatment completely and your immediate economic losses. Everything above that floor is damages that you are owed but that I can negotiate on. Rachel looked at her steadily. Do you understand what I'm asking you to authorize? You're asking me to tell you what I won't accept, Emily said. Yes. Emily thought for exactly 3 seconds. Ryan's treatment is not negotiable, she said. Whatever the final number is, it covers Ryan. Everything else you have my full discretion to negotiate. Rachel nodded once, crisply. That's what I needed to hear, she said. The 2 hours Victor's attorney had asked for became 3, which Rachel said was actually a good sign. It meant internal argument, which meant they were taking it seriously rather than preparing a reflexive dismissal. Emily spent those 3 hours in the waiting area with Daniel Brooks, who had stayed at Rachel's office rather than driving back to Tucson. They did not talk extensively. Daniel read something on his phone. Emily looked at her own phone without really seeing it. At one point, he bought 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the hallway and set one in front of her without asking, and she drank it without tasting it, and that was a sufficient form of companionship for what the moment required. Laura had left to get food for all of them and returned with sandwiches from a place 2 blocks away. She sat down and unwrapped hers with the methodical care of someone who had learned to eat during difficult situations and treated it as a functional necessity rather than anything pleasurable. At 3:47, Rachel's office door opened. Emily, Rachel said. Can you come in? Daniel and Laura looked at Emily. She looked back at them. I'll tell you everything, she said, and went in. Rachel was behind her desk. She had a legal pad in front of her, covered in handwriting that Emily could not read from where she was standing. but that looked dense and specific. Marcus Bellamy came back with a counter, Rachel said. They acknowledged liability on the wrongful termination. They did not acknowledge the defamation. They offered $140,000 as a global settlement with a mutual non-disclosure. Emily said, a non-disclosure, yes, meaning you could not discuss the case, the settlement, or the underlying conduct publicly. You could not cooperate with any regulatory or criminal investigation. Rachel's voice was completely flat. I declined on your behalf. I told him we would not sign any agreement that prevented cooperation with an ongoing criminal referral, that this was a non-negotiable condition, and that if that condition was not acceptable to his client, we would see them in court and he could explain to a jury why his client had been paying $240,000 to shell companies for 15 years. Emily stared at her. You turned down $140,000. I turned down $140,000 attached to a gag order that would have protected a criminal, Rachel said simply. That is not a settlement. That is a purchase. And I do not sell my clients. The room was very quiet. Then Emily said, what happened after you turned it down? Marcus Bellamy called back 11 minutes later, Rachel said. Victor is prepared to offer $185,000 with no non-disclosure provisions. He will issue written retractions to every shop he contacted. He will sign a statement acknowledging your competence, your integrity, and the legitimacy of the concerns you raised. He will cooperate voluntarily with the regulatory investigations, not the criminal referral, which is out of his hands now regardless, and he will not contest your claims before the Labor Board or the ROC. Emily's hands were in her lap. She was pressing them flat against her thighs. 185, she said. 185, Rachel confirmed. It covers Ryan's treatment in full. It covers your lost wages. It covers meaningful damages for the defamation. She paused. It is not everything you are owed. The professional damage, the 4 months of professional isolation, the psychological cost of what he put you through, the number for all of that would be significantly higher. But Emily, the criminal referral is in now. Whatever happens to Victor through that process, this settlement does not constrain it. And 185 today is real, Emily said. Real, Rachel agreed, and available. Emily looked at the legal pad on the desk. She thought about Ryan answering the phone on the third ring last night. I've been holding on. I'm good at it. She thought about the way he'd said it, not asking for anything, not putting pressure on her, just telling her something true about himself that also happened to break her heart a little. She thought about Daniel Brooks sitting in the waiting room with his soft-edged notebook, Laura with her 3-year-old banker's box, Sandra Kelleher, somewhere far from Tucson, who didn't know yet that the case she'd been to finish was about to go forward without her needing to be the one who finished it. She thought about Jackson Reed on Route 84, saying, give me 24 hours in the voice of a man who meant every word. Does accepting this settlement affect Daniel's ability to pursue the wage theft claims? She said, not at all. His claims are independent. And the other employees? The same. And the criminal investigation moves forward regardless. Regardless, Rachel said. Victor agreed to cooperate with civil regulatory investigations. He cannot uncooperate with the AG's office. Emily was quiet for one more moment. Just one. Because she wanted to take the full weight of what she was about to do and feel it before she did it. Tell them yes, she said. Rachel picked up the phone. She called Ryan from the parking structure. He answered on the first ring this time. Hey, he said, and his voice had the quality of someone who has been waiting near the phone. Hey, she said, Ryan, it's done. A silence. What's said? Very carefully. The money, she said, for the treatment program. I have it. I'm going to call the facility today, and I'm going to send the payment, and I need you to be ready to go in 4 days. Another silence. Longer. He said. I didn't sell the bike, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't sell it. She heard him breathe. In and out, careful and slow, and then the careful part stopped, and she heard something else 17 years old and trying not to cry, which sounded exactly like their father trying not to cry, which was a sound she had heard exactly twice in her life and which meant the feeling behind it was so large it had overwhelmed his usual self-control. "Ryan," she said gently. "It's okay, How," he managed. "How did you?" "I had help," she said. "And I had Dad's documentation habits, and I had 4 months of evidence, and I had a lawyer who doesn't accept settlement offers with gag orders attached." A sound that was half laugh, half something else. "A lawyer," he said. "And 4 bikers who stopped at a gas station," she said. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "Tell me," he said. So she told him. All of it, start to finish, the way she had told it to Dana, but differently. Ryan heard things the way their father had heard things. Laterally, picking up the connections and the implications behind the surface events. He asked sharp questions at exactly the right moments. When she described Laura's banker's box and the $240,000 in unaccounted payments, she heard him exhale slowly, the sound of someone doing math. He was moving money, Ryan said, through shell companies, for at least 15 years. "That's not just fraud," Ryan said. "That's a criminal enterprise," Emily confirmed. "The AG's office has the referral." "What happens to him?" Ryan said. Emily was quiet for a second. She had her own thoughts about what should happen to Victor Harrison, and they were not gentle thoughts. But she was 21 years old, and she had learned something in the past 4 days about the difference between what she wanted and what she could control. "What happens to him is up to the AG's office and whatever investigators look at what Laura handed over," she said. "What I know is that his business license is going to be under serious scrutiny. The ROC audit is coming. The civil settlement is on record. The retractions go out in writing to every shop he damaged me with." She paused. "He doesn't get to keep operating the way he has been. That much I know." "Is that enough?" Ryan asked. It was a genuine question. Her brother, 17, and still in the middle of something that had taken so much from him, asking her whether justice was sufficient when it didn't look exactly like punishment. "It's a beginning," Emily said. "The people he stole wages from Daniel and the others, they still have to file their own claims. Sandra Kelleher has to decide whether she comes back. The criminal investigation has to go wherever the evidence takes it. This isn't the end. It's the point where it stops being just me." Ryan was quiet. "I'm proud of you," he said. She closed her eyes. "Don't," she said. "I am. Dad would be," she said. "That's the one that matters." "He would be," Ryan agreed. "He absolutely would be." She found Jackson and Pete and Sal and Marcus in the parking lot of a bar 2 blocks from Rachel's office. She did not ask how they knew to be there. She suspected Marcus had been in contact with Rachel's office. She did not ask, because some things ran better on trust than on explanation. Jackson was leaning against his bike. When he saw her face, he read it the way he had read everything else completely, without asking, in about 4 seconds. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. Pete made a sound of genuine satisfaction. Sal nodded slowly. Marcus, who was already on his phone, held up one finger that meant "I already know, and I'm handling the next thing," which was entirely consistent with what she understood about Marcus. Jackson looked at her steadily. "How do you feel?" Emily thought about the question for a real moment. "I feel like an engine that just turned over," she said. "Like something that was stuck finally caught." Jackson smiled at that. It was the first full smile she had seen from him. The previous ones had been partial things, present but restrained. This one was complete. "Your father would know exactly what that means," he said. "He would." She looked at all 4 of them. "I don't know how to thank you. Any of you. I don't have a framework for this." "You don't need one," Jackson said. "This is what we do. Stop strangers on highways and rebuild their legal cases. Stop when someone's in trouble and figure out what we can do about it." He said it simply, without drama. "The rest of it, Rachel, Daniel, Laura, the settlement that was you built that. We just helped you see that it was buildable." Emily looked at him. "The bike," she said. "I want to ride it to Phoenix when Ryan starts his treatment. I want to ride it the way my dad would have, early morning. Highway the bike exactly as he built it." She paused. "Will you ride with me?" Jackson's looked at the other 3. Pete said, obviously, "I'll clear my..." Marcus, still on his phone, gave a thumbs up without looking up. Jackson turned back to Emily. "We'll be there," he said. She nodded. She looked down for a moment at the asphalt of the parking lot, at the space between where she was standing now and where she had been 48 hours ago on Route 84 with a handwritten sign that she had folded into a small square and dropped in a trash can. The distance between those 2 points was not measurable in miles. She looked up. "I need to call the treatment facility," she said. "Go," Jackson said. She took 3 steps toward her car, then stopped and turned back. "Jackson," she said. He looked at her. "My father used to say that the best machines are the ones that run honest," she said. "Clean, no shortcuts, everything where it's supposed to be." She held his gaze. "That's what you did. You ran honest when you didn't have to. When it would have been easier to just buy the bike and drive away." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Honest is the only way I know how to run," he said. She turned and walked to her car and called the treatment facility in Phoenix and told them she was sending a payment in full for Ryan Carter's intake in 4 days. And the woman on the other end of the line asked her to hold for a moment to verify the amount. And while Emily waited on hold, she looked through the windshield at the 4 motorcycles parked in a row and the 4 men who had stopped on Route 84 because they had seen a young woman standing alone with a sign. She thought about her father. She thought about the Road King sitting in its spot exactly as he had left it in the world, every piece honest, every component exactly where it was supposed to be. The woman came back on the line. "Miss Carter, we've confirmed the amount. We'll have the intake paperwork ready for Ryan on Thursday morning." "Thank you," Emily said. She ended the call. She sat in the borrowed car in the parking lot in Phoenix for exactly 30 seconds, letting the quiet settle around her like something deserved. Then she started the engine and drove toward Tucson, toward Ryan, toward the Road King, waiting in the dark of the borrowed garage, toward whatever came next in a story that had stopped being just hers, sometime between a gas station on Route 84 and a filing at 1147 that had landed on a lawyer's desk like a building falling. Victor Harrison was still in his shop in Tucson, but the ground under him was no longer solid. And Emily Carter was no longer standing on the side of the road. Ryan's intake was Thursday at 9 in the morning, and Emily was awake at 4. She did not fight it. She had not fought early mornings since her father died, because fighting them required a belief that sleep would eventually return, and some part of her had stopped believing that. She lay still for a few minutes in the dark, listening to the particular silence of a night that was almost finished, and then she got up and went to the garage. The Road King was exactly where she had left it. She had not touched it since she drove it back from Route 84, which felt like something that had happened to a different version of herself, a version that had been carrying so much alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to put something down. She stood beside the bike in the dark garage and put her hand on the fuel tank the same way she had done 100 times as a child when her father was working, and she would stand beside him and just place her palm against the metal to feel whatever he was feeling. The metal was cool and solid and exactly itself. "We made it," she said quietly, to the bike, to her father, to whatever combination of the two of them still existed in the space between memory and object. She did not wait for an answer. She knew the answer already. Her father had taught her that honest machines didn't lie, and this was telling her exactly what she needed to hear just by being in one piece. She went back inside and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her phone and waited for 5 o'clock, which was when she had told Ryan she would call. He answered at 4:53. "You were awake," she said. "Obviously," he said. "You too, obviously." A brief, warm silence, the kind that only exists between people who have been through enough. Together, that quiet doesn't need to be filled. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Nervous," he said, which was the most honest thing he had said to her in months. Ryan had been performing calm for her benefit for so long that hearing the real thing underneath it made her chest tighten. "That's right," she said. "Nervous is right. Nervous means you know it matters." "What if it doesn't work?" he said. "The program. What if I go through all of and it doesn't?" "Ryan," her voice was steady. "Dad used to say that a machine that's been running wrong for a long time doesn't fix itself in one session. You take it apart carefully. You fix the thing that's actually broken. You put it back together, right? And then you run it and listen. You listen for a long time before you decide what it's going to do. He was quiet. You're not broken, she said. You're a machine that needs the right mechanic. That's all. That's a very dad thing to say, he said. I know, I miss him, Ryan said. I know, she said again. Me too, every single day. They stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes without talking about anything that mattered. She asked him what he had packed, and he listed things in the random order of a teenager who had packed at midnight, and she told him he had forgotten socks. And he said he definitely had not forgotten socks, and she said to check again. And he checked and said, fine. He had forgotten socks. It was the most normal conversation they had managed in 4 months, and she held on to every word of it. At 6:30, she showered and dressed and went back to the garage. She had promised to ride. Jackson and Pete and Sal and Marcus were outside her building at 7:15, which was earlier than she had asked them to be. And she understood from that, from the fact that all 4 of them had ridden from wherever they had spent the night without being asked twice what kind of men they were. Jackson looked at the Road King when she wheeled it out. You maintained it, he said. My father maintained it, she said. I just kept his work going. Same thing, he said. She swung onto the bike and felt the familiar weight and balance of it settle under her. The specific geometry of a machine, built for one person's body and handed down to another person who was close enough in dimension that it still fit. She started the engine. The sound of a well-built engine at first start is not loud. People who don't know engines expect loudness, expect the performance of power. But what a truly well-built engine does at ignition is something quieter and more absolute, a settling, a confirmation, a deep and even note that says everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. James Carter's Road King said that this morning. Emily listened to it for a moment with her eyes closed. Then she opened them and looked at Jackson. Ready, she said. They rode 5 abreast on the highway, which was not legal but was also at 7:15 on a Thursday morning on the stretch between Tucson and Phoenix, essentially uncontested. Emily rode center, and the 4 men flanked her in the loose formation of people who have ridden together long enough that spacing is intuitive, and the desert opened up on all sides in the way. It always did, immense and indifferent, and somehow, this morning, not unkind. She thought about her father on this bike. She thought about the specific quality of his attention when he rode. She had ridden behind him exactly twice as a teenager, both times through the empty stretches east of the city. And what she remembered was not the speed or the landscape, but the way his shoulders had been. Completely still. Not the stillness of a man holding himself rigid, but the stillness of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. She understood that stillness now in a way she hadn't at 16. She understood it was not about the bike or the road or even the motion. It was about being fully inside the moment, not behind it, not ahead of it, but exactly in it. She rode in her father's stillness for 73 miles, and it was the closest she had felt to him since the morning she got the phone call. Ryan was waiting outside the treatment facility when they arrived. He was standing with a duffel bag at his feet and his hands in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he was 17 years old and trying very hard to look like he was not afraid, which meant he looked exactly like he was afraid, which meant he looked exactly like their father had looked. The one time Emily had seen him genuinely frightened, the night he had sat beside her mother's hospital bed during the surgery that turned out fine, holding his own hands and telling himself to breathe. She parked the bike and pulled off her helmet, and he looked at the 5 of them, and then he looked at his sister. You actually rode, he said. I told you I would. He looked at the Road King. Something moved across his face, 17 years in a medical condition, and 4 months of watching his sister carry something she should not have had to carry alone. And then he pressed his lips together and looked at Jackson. You're Jackson, he said. I am, Jackson said, and extended his hand. Ryan shook it. She told me what you did, Ryan said. On the highway. Not buying the bike when she was trying to sell it. I made a judgment call, Jackson said. You made the right one, Ryan said. My dad would have... He stopped. Tried again. Dad would have wanted to buy you all a drink. Except he didn't drink, so he would have bought you coffee and talked your ear off about carburetors for 3 hours. Pete laughed at that, a genuine, surprised laugh. I would have sat through it, Pete said. Ryan looked at all four of them. He was doing the thing Emily had watched him do his whole life, assessing people, not by what they said about themselves, but by how they held themselves when nothing was required of them. He had gotten that from their father, too. Whatever he saw, he nodded once. Okay, he said, and picked up his duffel bag. Emily walked him inside. Jackson and the others waited with the bikes. That was not something she had asked them to do, and it was exactly right. At the intake desk, while the staff was processing Ryan's paperwork, he turned to her and said very quietly, "You're going to be okay without me for a while." It was not a question. He was telling her. "I'm going to be okay," she confirmed. "And you're not going to spend the whole time working yourself to death. I have things to do." "And Ryan?" He looked at her with 17 years of knowing her face. "You already have something in mind. I can see it." She was quiet for a moment. "Rachel called yesterday," she said. "The labor board investigator, the new one, the senior one. She wants to meet with me next week about the supplemented complaint. And Daniel is organizing the other employees for the wage theft class action. He asked if I'd be a supporting witness. You said yes." I said yes. "And?" He knew there was more. She looked at the floor for a second, then back up at him. "Gerald Cook called me," she said. "The customer Victor defrauded on the insurance claim. He wants to connect me with 3 other customers he knows who had similar experiences with Harrison Custom Garage. He's been talking to people." She paused. "There might be more of them, more customers. Rachel thinks if we can document enough of a pattern on the insurance fraud side, the AG's office has what they need to move to a formal criminal investigation." Ryan stared at her. "You're building a bigger case," he said. "The settlement I signed doesn't prevent me from cooperating with investigations," she said. Rachel was very specific about that. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "Emily," he said, "you could just take the money and let the other pieces go. You'd be within your rights." "I know," she said, "but you're not going to." "Dad wrote things down because he believed in keeping honest records," she said. "He believed that the truth should exist somewhere outside a person's memory. Somewhere it couldn't be lost or frightened away or made to disappear. Daniel believed the same thing. Laura believed the same thing. Sandra Kelleher believed it, and Victor scared her into silence." She looked at her brother. "I'm not going to go silent," she said. "I have the records. The truth exists. It would be wrong to put it back in a box." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and put both arms around her, the way he hadn't done since their father's funeral, and she hugged him back with her whole self, her hands pressed flat against his back. And neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say that the holding didn't already cover. When he pulled back, his eyes were clear. "Okay," he said. "Go get him." She smiled. Her first real smile in 5 days. She realized the others had been relief and release, which were different things. This one came from somewhere deeper. "I'll see you in 8 weeks," she said. 7, he said. "I'm going to be ahead of schedule." She laughed. He picked up his duffel bag and walked through the interior door with the particular walk of a person who has decided to meet whatever is on the other side of it. She watched until the door closed. Then she stood alone in the lobby for exactly 30 seconds, her hands at her sides, and let the fullness of the moment exist without trying to process it too quickly. Ryan was inside. The money was paid. The bike was in the parking lot. Her father's work was intact, and her brother was where he needed to be. And the truth was in the hands of people who knew what to do with it. 30 seconds. Then she walked back outside. The ride back to Tucson was quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sound. The engines were the same. The road was the same. The Arizona morning was opening up around them, with the particular light that happened when the sun cleared the mountains and spread across the flat without obstruction. But something had completed itself. Emily felt it in the way you feel a repair finishing, not with a click or a sound, but an absence of the wrong thing. The vibration that had been wrong was gone. The tension that had been present in every moving part had settled into its correct place. They were 20 miles from Tucson when Jackson pulled alongside her and matched her speed. He did not look at her immediately. He rode beside her for a mile, 2 miles, with the easy parallel presence of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that some moment needed company rather than conversation. Then he looked over. She looked back. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was sufficient. That was complete. They pulled off at a diner outside Tucson, not the one on Route 84. A different one, closer to the city, and ordered breakfast like people who had earned it, which they had. The booth was slightly too small for all five of them, and nobody cared. The coffee was good. The food arrived in the wrong order, and everybody ate whatever appeared in front of them. Emily ate scrambled eggs and toast and drank 2 cups of coffee and felt, for the first time in what she calculated was approximately 5 months, like a person who was living forward rather than managing backward. What happens now? Sal asked at one point, not to Jackson, to Emily. She considered the question with the full attention it deserved. Rachel has the next steps on the legal side, she said. The regulatory complaints are supplemented and moving. Daniel's organizing the employees for the wage class action. Laura's financial records are with the AG's office referral. Gerald Cook is connecting me to other customers. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. And I need a job. Pete said, what kind of job? Mechanic, she said. What else? I've been a mechanic since I was 12 years old. Victor spent 4 months telling everyone in Tucson I wasn't. Part of the settlement is written retractions to every shop he contacted. Rachel is sending those out this week. She paused. But I'm not going to wait for the retractions to open doors. I'm going to open them myself. You have a plan, Marcus said. He was not asking. I have the beginning of one, she said. My father's tools are still in his garage. The garage is still in the family. The property belongs to my aunt, who has been paying the property taxes and keeping it available because she couldn't bring herself to clear it out. She looked at her coffee. I've been thinking about it since the settlement. What it would take to open a small shop. Not big, not commercial. Just honest work done well, the way my father did it, for people who need it done right. The table was quiet. Your father's garage, Jackson said. His tools, his space, his name on the sign, Emily said. Carter Mechanical. I've been saying it in my head for 3 days to see how it sounds. How does it sound? Sal asked. Like something he would have approved of, she said. Jackson reached for his coffee cup and held it up, and Pete did the same, and Sal, and Marcus, and Emily looked at the 4 coffee cups extended toward her and understood what was being offered without it needing to be named. She raised her own. Carter Mechanical, Jackson said. Carter Mechanical, she said. They drank. 3 weeks later, the Arizona Labor Board sent Emily a formal notice that the investigation into Harrison Custom Garage had been upgraded to a priority classification following the submission of supplemental evidence. The notice was 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic language that meant, translated into plain terms, that the case was no longer moving at the pace of institutional indifference. It was moving at the pace of people who had understood they were looking at something real. Rachel called to tell her about it before the letter arrived. There's more, Rachel said. Sandra Kelleher called me. Emily went still. She called you, Emily said, this morning. She heard through mutual contacts that the case was active again. She asked if it was too late to add her testimony back. Rachel's voice carried the particular quiet of a moment that had been a long time coming. I told her it was not too late. Emily sat down on the edge of her bed. She thought about Sandra Kelleher moving out of Tucson, packing her apartment, loading her car, driving away from the city where she had tried to do the right thing and been made to pay for it, finding somewhere else and carrying the weight of what she hadn't been able to finish. Is she all right? Emily asked. She's in Flagstaff, Rachel said. She has a job, an apartment. She sounds steady. A pause. She asked me to tell you something. What? She said, thank you, Rachel said, for not stopping. She said she had been afraid that what she did withdrawing had ended any chance of Victor being held accountable. She said, knowing that someone kept going, that the evidence survived, that it didn't die with her recantation. Rachel paused again. She said it was the first thing in 2 years that made her feel like she hadn't failed. Emily pressed her palm flat against her knee. She thought about the 27 photographs sitting on her phone for 4 months, unmentioned in any filing, unknown to Victor, waiting. She thought about the way her father had taught her to document carefully, to keep records honestly, to trust that the truth survived if you gave it somewhere solid to live. Sandra Kelleher had not failed. She had tried first and been frightened and paid a price that was not hers to pay. The failure had always belonged to the man who had frightened her. Tell her she didn't fail, Emily said. Tell her she was first, and first is harder than anything that comes after. The ROC audit of Harrison Custom Garage was formally opened 6 weeks after Emily's settlement. Rachel called to tell her on a Tuesday afternoon, and Emily was in her father's garage when the call came, sorting tools with the methodical care of someone who has inherited a collection that deserves to be treated as such. She had her father's 1/4-inch drive socket set in her hand when Rachel said the words formal audit, and she stood there holding it and felt something move through her that she did not have a name for. Not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what it was. Too focused on the person it had been against rather than the thing it had been for. It was closer to completion. The specific feeling of a job that has been done all the way through, every step taken in order, nothing skipped, nothing left loose. The audit, Rachel explained, had been initiated on the basis of the supplemental complaint combined with the independent customer corroboration from Gerald Cook and the 3 additional customers he had connected to Emily. The RC had requested 5 years of billing records from Harrison Custom Garage. Victor's attorney had complied because non-compliance was not an option that existed anymore. The secondary billing records the paper ones. In the locked room, the ones Emily had photographed on 2 careful Tuesday afternoons were going to be compared against the official records by investigators who knew exactly what they were looking for. Emily, Rachel said, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as a legal assessment rather than a prediction. What the Aussie investigators are going to find in those records is going to be consistent with what your photographs show. And when that happens, it won't be your photographs alone making the case. It will be the official records contradicting themselves. Victor's own documentation is going to be the evidence that finishes this. Emily set the socket set down on the workbench. He hid the truth in paper, she said. And paper doesn't lie, Rachel said. Her father had said that. Not about legal cases about engines. About the service records he kept for every vehicle he touched. The logs that showed exactly what had been done and when and why. Paper doesn't lie, he used to say. The work is in the record, and the record is in the work. Thank you, Rachel, she said. Thank you, Rachel said. I've been waiting 2 years to get back to this case. You gave me the way in. After the call, Emily stood in her father's garage for a long time. She was surrounded by 30 years of honest work, the tools, the organization, the evidence of a life spent doing things right. The garage smelled like oil and metal and the particular combination of substances that does not have a name, but that Emily had been breathing since she was old enough to follow her father inside. She picked up the socket set and put it in its correct place. She picked up the next thing and put it in its correct place. She worked through the whole bench that way, methodical and unhurried, returning everything to the position it belonged in. And by the time she was done, the garage looked the way her father had kept it ready, organized, honest in its arrangement, nothing pretending to be something it wasn't. She turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment. Carter Mechanical, she said quietly. The darkness did not answer, but it felt like the right kind of silence, the silence of a place that had absorbed 30 years of good work and was waiting, with the patience of built things, for more. The sign went up on a Saturday in late October, 8 weeks after Ryan's intake and 3 days after his first positive progress report from the facility. It was not a large sign. Emily had not wanted large. She had wanted something that looked like it meant what it said, painted letters on a wooden board. Carter Mechanical, with the address underneath. Her father's name made visible. His work made continuous. Jackson and Pete and Sal and Marcus were there. Dana was there. Gerald Cook was there, which had surprised Emily until she remembered that Gerald Cook was the kind of man who drove back to a shop to ask an honest question. And that kind of man shows up when something good is happening. Daniel Brooks was there, with his soft-edged notebook in his jacket pocket, which he probably wore out of habit now, the way you keep carrying something long after the crisis that required it has passed. Laura Bennett drove down from Flagstaff, and Sandra Kelleher drove down from Flagstaff. Emily had not expected Sandra. She had not asked her to come, had not wanted to ask, because asking would have put pressure on a woman who had already been through more than one person should reasonably absorb. But Sandra Keller stood in the parking lot of Carter Mechanical on a Saturday morning in late October, small and contained and steady, with the look of someone who has decided to reclaim something they had let go. Emily walked up to her, and Sandra looked at her and said, "I wanted to see it." "I'm glad you came," Emily said. "Your father's garage," Sandra said, looking at the sign. "His tools, his space, his name." Emily looked at it too. "I'm just the next person who gets to do honest work here." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "When Rachel calls me as a witness," she said, "not if, not possibly, but when," said with the finality of a decision made alone in Flagstaff and carried down the highway to this parking lot, "I'm going to tell them everything. All of it. The way it was and the way he made me feel about speaking and what happened when I stopped." She looked at Emily. "I'm not going to stop this time." Emily held her gaze. "I know you're not," she said. Sandra nodded once, and something in her face settled the particular settling of a person who has said a hard, true thing out loud and felt the relief of it existing somewhere outside themselves. Jackson appeared at Emily's elbow. "You ready?" he said. She looked at the sign. She looked at the people standing in the parking lot of her father's garage on a Saturday morning. She thought about Route 84 and a handwritten piece of cardboard and the particular loneliness of being the only person who knows the truth. She thought about her father's hands on the Road King. She thought about Ryan, 8 weeks into a program that was working, ahead of schedule the way he had promised. She thought about $43,000 in stolen wages being returned to 12 people who had worked honestly and been taken from systematically. She thought about a ROC audit comparing 2 sets of records that could not both be true. She thought about 27 photographs, metadata intact, taken on 2 careful Tuesday afternoons by a 21-year-old mechanic who had learned from her father that the truth deserved somewhere solid to live. She thought about all of it, all at once, the entire weight and shape of the last 5 months, and she held it for a moment, the way you hold something before you set it down, not because you want to keep carrying it, but because you want to know exactly what it was before it becomes the past. Then she set it down. "Ready," she said. She walked through the door of Carter Mechanical and got to work. The truth had survived. The machine was running clean. And Emily Carter, daughter of James Carter, mechanic, keeper of honest records, 21 years old and more certain of herself than she had ever been, was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she had been built to do. Some debts get paid in full. Some wrongs get righted completely. And sometimes, when a person stands alone on the side of a road, with nothing left but their father's motorcycle and the truth, the right people stop. That is not luck. That is the world, imperfect and brutal, and occasionally magnificent, being exactly what it should be.